the interest that our students have in both the CPG world, certainly in food and beverage as well. And, just beyond that, even he understands the backside of it too, the investing and the financial aspects. And I just oftentimes think that, like, if you have a larger understanding, like that bigger picture understanding, like where you can see the forest, uh, not just the trees, then you can kind of understand how to come in, how to enter it, and where some opportunities might be. Um, so I'm gonna jump right in. I'm in recording this just so everybody knows, because I'm sure there'll be people who follow me and ask if it was recorded. And Tom has nicely said that it would be okay to record it. So let me just jump right in. I'll do a kind of a quick bio, and then Tom will kind of take us through the different topics that I think you all had seen that we posted in Career Connect. And then we'll definitely have time for Q&A as well. But we're a small enough group that, Tom, I'm assuming you're okay. Can be
Ask
kind of,
questions. Happy to continue the
yeah,
conversation if people are interested on a certain topic. Yeah, no
yeah,
problem.
yeah. So, yeah. So, welcome everyone. So Tom is co-founder in Brandjectory and a co-founder and a partner at the Litchfield Fund, along with his wife, Susan Brayton. Did I say her name correctly there, her last name, Tom?
Bryanton.
Bryanton. All right, I was way
Bryanton.
off. I was way off there. Um, Tom brings more than 40 years experience in leadership, consulting, and C-level roles in general business, operations, technology, client experience, retail delivery, and working more than 30 years at a major USA bank. Um, Both Tom and Susan's passion for natural, healthy foods and lifestyle, and a desire to help entrepreneurs succeed has led them to start both the Litchfield Fund and Brandjectory, which I'll let kind of Tom jump into more details about. Tom holds a BS in mathematics from John Carroll University and an MBA from Case Western Reserve University's Weatherhead School. Um, Tom and Susan live in Scottsdale, Arizona, with their mini golden doodle DJ. So take it away, Tom.
And DJ is sleeping quietly at my feet at the moment, but I can't guarantee that for the next hour. So if something big and gold runs past us, you
Yeah, we
will know what it
understand.
is. Don't be afraid. It's not some spirit of some kind. Thank you, Jay and Alania, for having me here today. I really, really do appreciate it. I think in terms of, I'll talk about Brandjectory in just a second and I won't take too long about that. I do want to say, when Susan and I talk about our passion for this industry, um, you know, we had careers that were in different corporate entities from food. But we were the type that were running around in the 1980s trying to eat healthy. And in the 80s, that meant long before many people on the call here were born, it meant only salad and bran. That's what we knew. And the 1990s brought a series of products, Amy's, Annie's, ones today, Barbara's. At the time, something like Pirate Booty was considered healthy because it was a vegetable puff and not a corn puff. And we got about that, and we started going to trade shows just to learn new brands, and really got into the food arena. So when we had the chance to change careers, leave Cleveland, come to Scottsdale, we wanted to do something in food, and wanted to do something for entrepreneurs, because we'd met all these young entrepreneurs who didn't have necessarily a lot of business skills. We had developed a lot of contacts, and we wanted to do something. It led us to do some investing consulting with the Litchfield Fund, and then develop Brandjectory because we wanted to do more of it for more brands. And so that's why we did that. What Brandjectory is, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, it is a platform for emerging brands in CPG, food, beverage, health, wellness, alcohol, non-alcohol, snacks, frozen, intimate care, personal care, pet, anything that you would find on the shelves of a Whole Foods or a Sprouts. Those are the brands we work with. And what we give them, we have always about 100 brands on the platform, but what we give them is engagement, education, and exposure to industry investors and experts. We do that through some one-on-one consulting and an extensive knowledge base of videos and articles we've written and recorded. and through a series of virtual meetings every month where we connect them with industry experts, bring in and talk about topics, give them fundraising labs, give them trade spend labs, give them networking labs. We bring in experts in for one-on-one counseling, one-on-one mentoring, problem solving, group problem solving sessions, educational webinars. We do that throughout the month. So we're basically sort of a long-term accelerator for them, and we do that at a very, very, very reasonable cost because we know young brands don't have a lot of money to spend on these kinds of things. And so that's who we try to be. That's who we are. And we just get excited about it. As I mentioned, we have about 100 brands on our network, on our platform. We have about 800 investors in our network, probably 250 vendors that we call on for problem-solving sessions and educational webinars. And we get excited about seeing brands grow and get investments. So that's who we are. That's what we do. I don't need to talk about that any longer. So I guess, Jay, Elania, I don't know how you want to do this. I know that I have a few topics we agreed upon.
Yeah.
Do I just want me to jump right in and
Sure.
get going?
Great.
Sure.
Or I would also
shoot.
recommend, and you decide, sometimes we like to start the community tables, these conversations, just everybody saying like what's bringing you to the table, what's bringing
Sure.
you to the conversation, and just to understand a little bit more of
Yeah,
what are you.
That's a great idea,
So
Liana.
I could
That's a great
start.
idea.
I'm sorry, Jay?
That's a great idea. Yeah, do you want to start?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Ileana, I come from Mexico, and I am an aspiring food entrepreneur. I have been involved in the produce industry, but I would like to do a healthy snack myself in the future. So I'm exploring more like what are real real opportunities and not so much trends that you think that are just going to pass away, such as adaptogens, alternative proteins. That's a topic that I'm very interested in.
Excellent. Let's jump over to Daniela.
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniela Casas. I'm also part of Ely's cohort, graduating this upcoming May. I'm interested in like breaking into. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback. Into the CPG, like food and beverage community from a startup perspective. Interested in like brand management and brand innovation. So I'm just curious to learn more about the general environment.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you. Emmanuel.
Yes, my name is Emmanuel. I'm studying like entrepreneurship and management here. I'm interested in the CPG space because I studied marketing and fashion during like my undergrad. So I feel like there's sort of a connection between this, just in sort of like the way like you're having a product and like branding a product. And then also like I worked in grocery for about like 4 years, so I was just kind of like interested in it. So yeah.
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Manny. Can we jump to Srihas?
Yeah. Thank you, Rob. Hi, everybody. Yes, Sampath. So I'm a recent evening program at Babson, Petri and supplements brand, Skona. And we have our first product, a bunch of single ingredient beef. And we are working towards our pet supplements. Hopefully the product will be out this year. What we are bringing to the pet supplements market, Indian Ayurvedic ingredients. So we are very excited. So more on how to do a proper product launch and learn more about the platform. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Srihas. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. Pietro.
Hi, I'm Pietro. I'm interested in building a platform that automates compliance for businesses in Europe to the US. And that's why I joined, just hearing a little bit more about what you guys do.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, welcome. And I think that captures everyone. So I will share the mic back to you, Tom.
Okay. So before I get into, and I'm planning to talk a lot about, how do you launch a CPG brand? How do you, understand what your market is, how you raise money, what investors are interested in, where they're going. I know Alania mentioned about alternate proteins and functional foods and things like that, so I'll get into all that. But I think it's important to start with a general overview of what's going on in CPG right now. A lot has happened over the last few years with, supply back in 21 and 22, supply chains. That might happen again now with tariffs. A lot has happened with inflation. And the consumer has changed. And to me, that's the biggest thing, and it leads into developing a product. The biggest thing that every brand, whether they're big or small, has to think about right now. The biggest change for the consumer has been now a demonstrated lack of loyalty. Okay, consumers will no longer stick with a brand. They will no longer stick with a product. They will no longer stick with a retailer. They will no longer stick with a channel. They are searching for value. And to the consumer, most studies tell us that it's still price that matters the most. Okay, but second there is value, and value is taste, functionality, and efficacy, and actual convenience. Convenience is driving a lot of the market right now. And brands that traditionally would have found themselves on the shelf are looking to make their way to the convenience store and be at the checkout line. Okay, because that's where people are buying. The Dollar Trees, the 7-Elevens, the Truck Americas, their sales are going up. Okay, people are into snacking, people are into multiple meals and smaller meals. You can just go to the grocery store. I mean, I remember when I was in college, I didn't really go to the grocery store. Okay, I may have stopped at the grocery store on my way home if I didn't have anything to eat. But, I didn't really go to the grocery store, even through grad school, I think. But anyways, you will notice that the convenience prep sections are getting larger. Just today I read, that Hy-Vee, a market in the central part of the USA, they closed their prep facilities and moved meal prep back to the grocery stores for freshness, convenience, inventory control, getting it on the shelf as quickly as possible. Okay, so this is what's changing from a consumer perspective. It's value and convenience. To me, that's what's driving most everything right now. Shoppers are willing to hit more than one grocery store. Okay, so no longer, from a, and mentioned trade spend earlier. No longer is it simply, okay, we got a great deal going at Whole Foods. Okay, well, that may or may not work because that shopper is saying, but wait, I can get more things at a better value at Sprouts. Okay, so the shopper is a lot more flaky. That's the right word to use. They're willing to go where the pricing is. They're willing to go where the value is. They're willing to go to more than one store. The other thing that I think people have to realize who are launching a product is that that there is a lot on the shelf. Okay. And there's a lot on the shelf, yet you look at something like Sprouts, and I don't, Sprouts is in Massachusetts, or at least in Pennsylvania, I know. If you look at somebody like Sprouts, they've got the science down. No longer just the Costco's who are saying this piece of retail square inch is worth this much. Sprouts has 28,000 square foot store. Okay, they have 4 popcorn brands. One's their own, one's Lesser Evil, and a couple are young brands. Okay, they really have honed down what that is and what the consumer is and what the consumer is looking for in their stores. And boom, that's why they can put up 50 stores in a year. Okay, because the model, they've gotten it down, they've gotten it to a science, they know how to make that 28,000 square feet work. Okay, and where Whole Foods will still build a 55,000 square foot store and an 80,000 square foot store, and they're trying in New York City to have daily stores, which are more like 12,000 or 13,000 square feet, maybe even smaller than that. I'm not sure. They're doing that because they still feel that's their market. And and we live here, and I like to call Phoenix and Scottsdale grocery store heaven because you can't walk out the door and not hit a grocery store. We have a Sprouts and a Whole Foods across the street from each other. Okay, You know, Sprouts is the mom's shopping. You know, it is they've got their kids with them. They're picking up all the supplies. Whole Foods is retired folks going in to get meal convenience things. That's one of the reasons we go there. People picking up certain products, young folks on the way home from the office, way home from the gym. You can see that they've really, their markets are very different. Yet some of the products overlap, but some of the products are different. Okay. And that's where the retailers are getting smarter about how they fill those shelves. It makes it just harder for young entrepreneurs. The last thing I want to say about where the industry is headed is with the possible and coming changes we've seen from the FDA in terms of food compliance and the cleanliness of food. This is one where, when Susan and I got interested in the industry, it was very clean. Okay, the new products were organic and and maybe taste suffered, and certainly they were expensive. It's the shift has kind of come like this, where the two have kind of met in the middle. Brands want to be mass market, so they start to give up on some of the quality of clean food in order to be on the shelf in major stores at the right price. Okay. Meanwhile, if the Pepsis and the Coca-Colas and they control the shelves. Okay, they control the snack shelves. They control the if they want to put a new snack out, it's going to be there for it's going to be the retailer is going to put it on the shelf. So when a new brand is thinking about how it's going to build this product, and I'll talk about this in just a minute. They start thinking about ingredients, where the ingredients come from. Certainly, they have to de-risk their supply chain. We saw that starting in 22. It continues now. You have to make sure you have a good supply. But certainly, what may happen here is that as bigger brands start to realize they have to make a cleaner, better product, it will hopefully drive down some of the costs for emerging brands who can't find someone to make their product, co-man their product, because technology may not be available. They're not used to working with the ingredients. They don't have the time on the line to switch over. Suddenly these things may change for a young brand, and it actually may improve the cost structure for young brands getting into the market. I'm probably a contrary view on that, but I really do think that one of the tough things about building a brand today is how hard it is to manufacture your brand in those early stages of growth. Once you get past the commercial kitchen and you're not doing it yourself, or you're not doing it with yourself and 3 friends, okay, who are willing to get pizza to help you cook one day, it starts to get tough to build that product because of the cost, because of the necessary timeline you have to get on equipment, at larger processors. It becomes difficult. So I think that's one thing that'll benefit. To me, those are the things driving CPG at a larger level right now. So if you're, and I'll stop there and pause before I get into launching a brand to see if there's any other questions about the market, or where what consumers are doing or what retailers are doing right now.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, like what you're talking about, the potential opportunities that arise from this. For example, we can see that the trend has been that there have been so many acquisitions from these huge brands that are starting to get interested in younger brands, but instead of innovating, or perhaps on the side of innovating, they are going into this smaller companies being acquired. So what I would ask, like, what do you think that these huge brands are taking into account, besides the product being like very, I don't know, I would like to ask, like, what are the things that big brands are looking at little small brands when considering them to be acquired?
So in my opinion, Alana, the larger brands, okay, they've never been good, and many have tried to develop products that fit a better set of a better set of ingredients that are clean and functional. They find it hard to do that. They're not designed to do that. They're designed as large marketing companies. They are literally no different than Ford Motor in the 1960s. In the 1960s, being able to advertise and put their brand out, and pay the millions of dollars for Super Bowl ad, to launch a new flavor of Doritos. Okay, so they're able to do that. Okay, they're buying customers. They want to start attracting those customers to them. Okay, so when you see, Poppy getting bought, or any of these other brands that they're picking up, they're picking up consumers that they would never reach. Okay,
Mhm.
they're not going to reach they're not going to reach Chamberlain Coffee online. They have a set group of people that they are marketing to that company. The people know who that company is. They're running out and buy it. So they're worth an investment. They're worth a purchase. This is where what I think the big companies are looking for. They're looking for consumers that they're not touching today. Okay, and they
Yeah.
can't touch them with the product. Once they touch them, they can start to understand who that consumer is, develop develop more products for them, find more products that fit them. Okay, we've seen, and what happened years ago, there were a lot of large companies that acquired young brands, and it didn't work. Okay, Crave Jerky is one of them. It had to go back. Okay, it had to go back to the to being an independent brand. There's
Mhm.
others that fit that mold. So they're trying to get into a market they don't have, with a product they can't develop, with someone that's already got the consumer following. So those are the reasons I think that they're looking at smaller brands. And again, when we talk about smaller brands, they're not that small. Poppy wasn't
Yeah.
all that small. Okay, it wasn't tiny by the time it gets picked up. But the investor, when they look at a brand, the investor payback. So they're thinking about eventual exits. And every brand, they're at 250,000 in sales. They say we're going to get bought by Pepsi. Well, that's not the way the investor's thinking about it. The investor's looking at a whole lot of different sets of parameters there as to how that company can grow, and where that potential is for making their money back.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thanks, Ileana. Any other questions?
Sure.
I find it interesting, Tom, that when those happen, I often wonder when that big, the big box comes in and kind of gobbles up that smaller one, because, to your point, they're trying to gain access to that many more customers. Do they oftentimes, pivot and change after they've purchased it because they realize it's not cost beneficial for them? Like, do they start
It happens.
eliminating ingredients? Do they start changing things because
It
it's not?
happens. It definitely happens.
Yeah.
Okay. They also, if they lose the touch that the original brand had with the consumer, they lose consumers. This is why things like Crave Jerky and others, and it's one that I remember. They got bought for a huge amount, and eventually got sold off. But these are the kinds of things that do happen when they launch young brands and when they buy young brands. And it's difficult, for brands to, but some do succeed. Some will succeed in a new environment. But yes, I do think one of the things that comes to risk is product quality. And again, that has to do with the constraints that the big companies have. One of the brands we're working with, and it's just really, really interesting. The typical incontinence undergarment is made on the same line as diapers. Okay, so when you think about those kinds of products, it's difficult to find something, especially for women, that's stylish and looks nice. And we are actually working with a company that redid that. They came up with a new material that could be put on a different kind of line and get made differently, so that it's stylish and fashionable, and and has an appeal that a diaper looking product doesn't have. And so these are the kinds of things that actually make a difference in the market, because it's doing something that's going to be brand new. And so those are the kinds of interesting little things that happen. And you're right, that's what gets lost when it goes, because if they got purchased by Procter and Gamble, or what's the company I'm thinking of? I can't think of that. Kimberly Clark. If they got purchased by them, they're not going to keep a separate line for a brand like that. They're going to figure out a way to try to put it on their regular line. Does it lose its appeal? Does it lose its fashion taste? These are the kinds of things that are risk. And I only point that out because it's one where it's kind of obvious, what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not. No. Are you familiar at all, Tom, with it's an older brand called Food Should Taste Good.
Yes.
So those actually, the founders of those, I don't know, Ileana and Danielle, if you guys knew this, but the founders of that are Babson alums.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, they started it years ago, and then I want to say they ended up selling it to like General Mills, one of these.
One of
one
them, I
these-
can't remember which
Yeah.
one, but yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
yeah, I and again, has General Mills done the same thing? We used to eat it. We found cleaner stuff now. That's us. We look for clean stuff. I'm not saying that's a market thing. I'm saying that's me and Susan.
yeah.
Should I jump into talking a little bit about launching a brand?
Yeah, sure.
Definitely. Thank
Sure.
you.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So anyways, if you're thinking about launching a CPG brand, it's difficult. Okay. And I'll put you, I'll go past a little bit of the detail and go to where you have to be. To start growing, to start being interesting to investors, you have to have a product, you have to get on a shelf. Okay. So in CPG, investors aren't going to invest in a vapor food, vapor beverage. Okay. It's not like, developing a software product where you say, okay, I have this mechanism, it does this, I can interest 100,000 people in it in the first year at a $299 subscription. It's not like that. Investors want to touch, see a product, taste the product, and they want to see that it's moving off the shelf. So unless you're, a celebrity or an athlete, or a Kim Kardashian who has, billions of followers on Instagram, investors are not going to be interested until there's a product there. Building that product usually goes through a variety of stages. One of the reasons Susan and I started Brandjectory was that, a lot of people come to CPG from other walks of life. Some aren't starting out as young as some of the folks here are. Some are, disillusioned lawyers, tired accountants, and they,
Former
they
bankers.
have Right. They have grandma's recipe that always does great at the parties, and they say, hey, maybe I can make this into a product. Or they are young people who found a berry. The story is like this, I found a berry hiking in the Andes at 16,000 feet. And it's only this one group of people that actually, drive down the river and get it. And, there's all these stories, and they're great and they're wonderful. And they're good things and good functionality and stuff like that. But developing that product, usually you have to work with a food scientist. Usually you have to figure out, how you're going to make the product at scale, whether it's in a commercial kitchen or whether you start to go to a co-packer. The recipe doesn't work across everything. So the development of a product that could get on the shelf, I've seen people do it for 50 or 60 grand. I've seen a lot of people do it for upwards to 250. Sometimes beverage tends to cost the most because it takes, how are you going to package it? Is it going to be canned? Is it going to be bottled? How does that change the formula? It gets into ingredients. And of course, if you're trying to make it functional in some way, then you have to think about, and we've seen the recent lawsuits where people say, well, I'd have to drink, 89 cans a day of that to get one actual dose of probiotic. Okay. So you have to think about what functionality you're delivering. You have to make sure you're in compliance. You have to make sure whoever is making it is in compliance. This takes money up front to do. Okay. And, the launching of that brand, the branding and and how you're going to go and market, that all matters. But to me, the thing you need to do first, and many brands have launched this way, you got to do a farmer's market. You got to do a pop-up somewhere. You got to get that product in front of people. You, the founder, have to talk to people. You have to find out what that feedback is on your product. Okay. And you got to keep tweaking, whether you're doing it in a commercial kitchen, you got to keep tweaking. You got to keep, making sure it's ready. And you have to understand who's buying that product. I will talk about more on that in a second. But the way to continue to move to me is always local. It's always staying close to home. It's finding the independents who are willing to take you on, who don't have to get approved by by somebody in a city, big city somewhere. They can make a decision. They can put it on the shelf. If it's a drink or a snack, you have local cafes that will take it. Campus cafes, things like that. Will they go beyond the traditional distributors and take a product on the pop-up stands and stuff like that? Get that kind of validation, get that kind of feedback, because that's going to be real important when you start to build out and when you try to get on the shelf. At this stage, okay, you're not going to find a lot of investors. Okay, investors aren't going to be interested until you're showing 100,000, 250,000, and only certain types of investors. So I'm going to get to that in a second. Okay, you're going to be.
Tom, I'm sorry. What did you mean by 150,000? Can you clarify that?
In revenue, in annual revenue. When you start showing that you can pick up $10,000 a month in revenue, that's when angel investors will start to get interested. But when you're getting through this launching stage, you're going to be taking friends and family money. You're going to be taking, using your own money. You might be running up debit card, and credit card debt kind of thing. But this is the tough part. The tough part is getting that brand out there, getting the validation, and then, trying to get on the shelves of local places where you can get some feedback, you can get some understanding of who's buying. And you're going to be using friends and family money. You're going to be using, local grants at this stage usually work. When you get to that, and I'm going to roughly say about $10,000 a month, you can actually find angels. There'll be angel groups in your area. There will be, private angels that you might get connected to through people. These are folks, if you're trying to raise, 50,000 or, 100,000, a small amount, they may be willing to put in 5,000 or 10,000. This is a process that you are going to follow for the rest of of CPG brand's growth. Okay. You're always in fundraising stage. You may be focusing on operations and you may be focusing on buyers, and I'll talk about buyers in a second, but you're always going to be fundraising. And it doesn't mean you're always going to be taking money in, but you're always going to be working on meeting people, connecting with people, getting introduced to people, asking who people know. This is the only way you can get there. A lot of people use crowdfunding. It's expensive, and I've got people that spend a lot more time doing this than I do when it comes to talking to brands about crowdfunding. They'll say the return is 1 to 1x of what 1.5x of what you put into crowdfunding in terms of time and money, what you get back. It's not the greatest investment in the world. So it's better to, try to find those contacts, start talking to them. And at this stage, when you're just starting to get on the shelf, you're starting to find yourself in local stores, it's going to be these kinds of smaller angels that are going to be looking at you. And you're going to be talking to buyers probably of local, smaller, independent grocers, cafes, things like that. They're still going to be asking you who's buying the product, who's picking it up. And as you go to the next stages of actually getting to private angels and growth funds, LPs, single family offices, small multifamily offices, and eventually to PEs and VCs, the investor is always going to be asking the same question, at least from my experience. Who's your customer? How are you reaching them? When are you going to be profitable? This is what the investor wants to know. So at what I'll call the angel stage, this is probably when you're over 500,000 in sales, maybe not at $1 million or $1.5 million yet. you're going to be finding angel investors. You're going to have to be finding angel groups that are investing $25,000 or $50,000. You're probably raising $500,000 to $1 million. That's all people expect to see if you're at that $500,000 or $750,000 in sales. And you're going to be talking to them, and they're going to be asking these questions. From there until you get to the VCs, you're probably talking about LPs and growth funds, the kinds of people that might put 150 grand or 250 grand into $1 million raise. The VCs, some of them won't even write a check if it's not 3 million that they're writing. They won't look at a brand unless they're at 3 to 5 million in sales. It's tough to be a brand in the million to 3 million range in revenue, trying to raise $1.5 million. That's really, really tough right now for the kinds of investors that are out there. But investors at all these levels will be looking at how you are minimizing your risk and when you are going to be profitable. This is important because 5 years ago, 5 years, takes a lot of money to build a CPG brand. Okay, that was the mantra. Okay, it takes a lot of money. You can't make a beverage brand without putting. Investors aren't asking that anymore. They're asking, when are you going to be profitable? And how do you get profitable without taking more dilution in equity in that brand? They want to see brands get to a positive cash flow and be able to grow with non-dilutive financing. And that's when they start to get interesting, because for them, that's when they can map themselves to the profitability stage. That's when they can map you to the exit stage. They start to understand those parameters because your growth is understood. They are looking for repetitive success. If you are successful in the New York Northeast region, and you've gotten the Whole Foods and the A-Hole D-Hulls brands, Giant, you've gotten in Wegmans, you're starting to encompass that area, and you can prove how you did it. They'll start to think, how does that work in SoCal? How does that work in Texas? How does that work in Florida? Okay, how does that work? How does that play in Seattle? They start to figure that out then, and they can say, okay, the success you had in building the brand, whether it was managing costs, demos, trade spend, whatever it is you know how to use to do, they want to know you can repeat that. And the repetition comes at a cost that doesn't mean you're always out there raising money. So whether you're looking at an eventual exit, or whether you're looking at your next investor, or whether you're looking to pay for your next production run, the idea of building a good business on solid, good business foundations is what you need to do. So even if you're at $100,000 in sales, you can't have a 250,000 negative EBITDA. Okay, the investors aren't going to buy that anymore. Okay, you have to be managing that business like it's a $100,000 business. Jay, I think you look like you had a question.
Well, actually, it's Ileana. I believe Ileana has a question.
Oh,
Yes. So then, if I understand correctly, for CPG specifically, it is very different from other industries in the sense of you can pitch an idea, you can pitch your projections, or you can pitch this is going to be my plan. Over here, you do need to have a track record and have to say, these are the sales that I have, and this is what I'm currently doing and where I'll be. But you have to prove it. It's way more different than other industries then.
Exactly right. They're once you get past that friends and family money, you're going to say, I'm in 13 Whole Foods in the region. Okay. And they're going to say, what's your velocity compared to your competitors?
Yeah.
Okay. And, and they'll understand. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, they'll understand you're a new brand and you're getting started and things like that. But, they're going to say also, and I talk to a lot of investors and I talk to a lot of brands, come back in 3 months when you do this. But that's actually the conversation you want as you're growing. You want the conversation that the investor is interested enough to tell you what they want to see, okay, and that that they are willing to talk to you when you get there. But yeah, you're in CPG. You're not selling an idea. It's a long way off from that. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So that was a lot of information. Are there any other questions anybody has? what Tom just shared as far as the launching of the CPG brand. Big Shy.
Okay, well, I will jump
Okay.
into talking about like investors are looking for.
Yeah.
Okay. We kind of already covered a lot of it in terms of investors are looking for the people that are building a good brand. They are looking for people who, brands that know who their consumer is and know where their consumer is and what what that consumer is looking for. Um, it's interesting. I will read somebody. They will always come up first with a description of their product as to what's important about their product. But in this world, in CPG, it's food, it's beverage, it's personal use things. It touches people closely. So if you don't have a good understanding of why a consumer is picking you off the shelf or off the internet from everything else that's out there, it's not going to win with the investor. Okay. So the investor is looking for, and this is why some of the social media brands get a lot of attention. They know who their consumer is. They're reaching them. They're touching them. They're getting them to buy the product. Okay, they know how to do that. But the investors are looking for three things, I guess, is what they're looking for: that you can play on price, that you have functionality, and that you show from a taste perspective that the consumer wants you. The consumer taste is still king, as much as people want functional products and they want stylish brands and things that meet their lifestyle. They still want taste. So the investor and brands should be looking at taste, that they can play on price, and that they have the functionality. When inflation hit over the last 3 years, it's really interesting. You can see that the functional products still did well because people weren't going to give up the functionality. Okay. So as people made these cuts and changed their styles of where they were shopping and everything else, they weren't cutting out the functional things they needed. So while sales changed at Hershey and Nestle and Kraft and other places because people sought other products, didn't happen with a lot of the functional products. They held steady. They managed to live through it because they could raise their prices a little bit, and they still, they still stood that test of time, that they could get through that kind of situation. This is what catches investors' attention. You know who your consumer is, and you know why they're buying you, and you know how to reach them, and your product is such that it offers a different level of functionality. So the next thing we're going to talk about is where capital flows, and it's all tied in, right? So where is capital flowing, and where is it drying up? For me, this is always interesting because just like consumer preferences have seemed to change a lot, so have investor preferences. Okay, it kind of always surprised me, and I'm just being very frank and honest here. Tons of money have been put into plant-based meats. The market was never going to be huge for plant-based meats, but a ton of money went into it. And now we see plant-based meat companies closing up. Okay. This is sort of the way of the world. I guess I know guys who are still living off a golf app they built in 1998, and, they sold it, and, they got a lot of money, and, the thing went under in 3 years because the internet went, and apps went crazy. They went completely different, but, it's kind of that stage. Money is flowing to things that are different, interesting. It always will. So from an investor perspective, there's still a lot of funding going on for non-alcohol beverages. Okay. People that are able to capture a lifestyle, capture what people want to feel as opposed to what they're actually taking into their bodies. There's also investor dollars flowing to alcohol, because again, there are companies out there who are trying to make a different kind of whiskey, better for you alcohol products with better for you ingredients, or at least better ingredients, more premium ingredients. Investors will always lend to products that are premium because it means a higher margin. Okay. There's
Tom.
a lot of I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask a quick question, backing up a little bit. So with the statement that you made about the plant-based meats. It sounds like many of those companies or whatnot are sort of becoming obsolete, somewhat obsolete. Is kind of what I'm reading. I'm just
I'm
curious,
taking it as a
why
market shakeout.
do you think it was a trend? Why do you think it's faded away?
I think it's a shakeout. I think it's still an issue of who can do it at scale and who's going to build it at scale. Okay. There are a lot more companies today on the tech side working on, being able to, do the process, the fermentation, whatever it is that takes place. There's a lot more companies building that technology because the brand itself can have a hard time trying to build that technology to make mushroom into something that sounds like, tastes like meat.
Yeah,
Okay, so there's companies getting into that. It's a shakeout on pricing. Okay, it's a shakeout on quality, because there were so many entries. Okay, it's also a shakeout because the market is only so big. I mean, it's not that people aren't going to eat plant-based meats, but the market is still going to be a small amount of the entire protein market, and where everybody can get protein, just from plant-based to, eggs, meat, and dairy. So, it's still going to be a small part of the market. So there's just the shakeout that's going on, based on pricing and cost.
got it. Okay, thanks.
Um, so the other places where functionality, the difference, something that's different, something that's interesting for investors. This is where investor money flows. So another bar on the shelf, is not going to interest investors unless there's something new and different about it. So what you see now is, the brands like the bar brands that are getting, investment, they're adding extra protein. Okay. And you see that money is flowing to those that are offering protein because protein is a hot thing in people's minds. It's so hot that Bimbo Bakeries is going to release Thomas Muffins, English muffins with 20 grams of protein. Okay. This is Thomas's muffins. I mean, they've been on the shelf for how many, I don't know, 100 years. I have no idea
Yeah.
how long they've been on the shelf. Okay. It's one of the trends that investors are picking up on. But branding, where money flows is where something is branded, something is messaged properly, somebody has the functionality that people are looking for. Things that are still big, I think, are brain health, certainly qualities that deal with stress. That's why some of the mushroom functionality is catching on really well. Protein's a big one, and yes, healthy for you. And I think that's the healthy part is kind of a given. Investors aren't really looking at something right now that's going to have a lot of red dyes in it, or has a catch-all natural flavors quality to it. I like to look at some products like there's a couple of dough brands like cookie dough brands like Dough, Deux, and a couple of others that have really gotten very clean, have added some vitamins to them. These are the things that interest investors. These are things that interest consumers. You have to have that one differential kind of quality that puts you in a category that hasn't been seen, hasn't been overly used, and where the big companies still aren't paying attention. Okay, so this is why I think the non-alcs are doing so well, because the non-alcs that are doing real well, or that I've seen do well, seem to be people who are are alcohol enthusiasts who know how to make alcohol and decide to make a non-alc drink the way you would make alcohol. So it has the craft, it has the flavor, it has the feel, even though it's a non-alc product. And this is where I think investors are paying attention and where their money is flowing. Okay, is to these kinds of categories where people are really showing a difference, between what's out there and what they're creating. So I don't know. I can stop there for a second. I know I've kind of covered almost everything here that we had talked about, Jay and Alana. really about where investors are looking, what they're looking for. I think what you see, and I think the market as a whole, consumers and brand creators, it's always from a consumer's perspective, and I can use our personal story here. We're always looking for something that's a little better, something that's a little cleaner, something that has more qualities to it, more functionality to it, something that delivers us to something. We are less concerned about price on those things than we are, concerned about, the price of meat and eggs and bread and the other standards that we have in our house, even though those are cleaner standards. We have less concern about, about these kinds of products. I think the guys under which we've operated, is eating better at 20 means you're going to feel better at 40, and eating better at 40 means you're going to feel better at 60, and I think more people are realizing that, and have been for a long time. I think there's some heightened awareness now with the changes at HHS, where there's more heightened awareness on what health really means. And I think all those things will do well for CPG, but I think it's going to bring changes to CPG. I think we're going to see how brands react to that, and how they try to build those better products that offer more to the consumer. The more you can offer, the better value it's going to be perceived, the better you're going to be able to target your consumer, and the more interest you're going to get from an investor.
Super helpful.
I had a
That's
question.
really helpful.
Sure.
Interrupt here. Hi, Tom. I'm very excited. I'm
Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you. So you mentioned before, like the plant-based meat was a good example for me. Like companies got crazy amounts of investments, but they honestly barely had a product, right? So I worked with a company that got millions of dollars of funding, but they couldn't control like bacterial growth in their fermentation and eventually closed.
Right.
Like, so I see investors often like being excited about new things, and I want to enter like the plant-based market, but with a product that is like actually a high quality and actually clean label and like actually has a good texture and it's actually nutritious, but it's not really new, right? But it's better. Like, how can I frame that?
So,
To
you described a product to me that I think about is a functional snack. Okay. And snack broadly defined. It could be a cookie dough ball. It could be a cracker. It could be, it's more controllable. Okay. It's easier to build. Okay. It has natural plant-based qualities. One product we really have loved is it's a product called Humble Seed. And it was originally 7 seeds made into flour for the cracker. So it was so much better than anything else out there. They actually got bought by a larger company and they added cassava flour, okay, which kind of ruins the whole effect of it. But again, that's another good example of a product that but was an excellent product, and it was so different and so unique, and it offered so much more quality in what you were, So I think when it comes to plant-based and doing something special, it revolves around the convenience of getting those functional qualities.
Like, I just want to plan that. Oh, okay, thank you.
Jay, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Didn't know if that was a question. And the other, I think I would be neglectful if I didn't say, there's a lot of money flowing into ag tech, and I can't remember if it was Surhouse or somebody else said they were looking at building compliance systems. There is a lot of money flowing into supply chain products, supply chain platforms, ag tech, robotics, biologicals. There's a lot of money flowing in those directions. Okay. When I say biologicals, it covers a lot. It covers companies that are fermenting, food, fermenting supplements, fermenting ingredients. It covers companies that are, trying to make pesticides and fertilizers that are more natural and more, better for the earth, better for the soil, better for the consumer. It covers a lot. One of the companies that continues to get big funding is a company called Carbon Robotics, and I think it's kind of cool. They basically can take they have a mechanism. They throw it on an old tractor, and you can remotely control your tractor. Okay, so the tractor can be 25 years old, and a tractor costs a lot of money. I mean, a farmer can't go out and buy a tractor, but if he could manage 2 tractors, at the same time, 2 old tractors at the same time, have them both running automatically from an app. Hey, you know, that's a great idea. These are the kinds of things that are out there. You know, the whole idea of weeding and robotic weeding, robotic drone control for pesticides. You know, these devices that will view the health of a plant or a crop, to automatically weed out the losers and leave in the winners, so that you get a healthier crop. You know, these things I think are going to be marvelous, and especially to continue to be able to use the land as much as possible, and not overtax the land in the long term. I think these things will be really, really helpful, and there is a lot of money flowing into these, and they're really going to be helpful if they can be developed at scale and then go to larger countries like India and into Africa and places like that, which have a lot of land, but it's difficult to manage. I love the idea, having lived in Cleveland for most of my life. I love the idea of controlled environment farms, vertical farms. I love the idea of it, because it would be wonderful to be able to get something fresh off the vine, in December in Cleveland, Ohio. We used to laugh and say we never got a good avocado in Cleveland because they just couldn't get there, either because of the cold or because of the humidity and heat. They never got there well. So that idea I love. It's another one, like a lot like plant-based. Been a lot of money put into it. There's been a lot of big vertical farm organizations that have failed. Okay, it's a tough environment. It's a good one because I think it manages water, it manages soil, it gets fresher vegetables, fresher produce, fresher microgreens to the consumer. But it's one where it's hard to to prove out the model so far long term. And there's a Swiss company that's building a 200,000 square foot facility in northern Italy right now. Okay, it's like, okay, but is that really going to be, they're spending like $200 million to build this facility, one facility. Okay, is that really going to have the returns? I have no idea.
That's true.
But I would have been, if I hadn't mentioned ag tech and robotics, I think I would have been. I needed to mention those. Even the food service robotics are really interesting from a perspective, and they're getting a lot of money. So I mean, eventually you'll go to a Domino's, it'll be an AI order system, and there'll be robots putting your pizza together. And I mean, I think that will happen. I don't know if in my lifetime, maybe in yours, but I don't know if it's going to be 20 years or 50 years, but I don't see why it wouldn't happen.
Yeah, and actually in Switzerland, in our school canteen, we tested some like robots that brought the food to us and stuff. It was really fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's cool. Grocery stores, and I don't know, I'm probably out of time here. Grocery stores, the tally robot, okay, that goes up and down and scans the aisle, says where inventory is missing. They are in the Northeast. I don't know if you guys have seen them.
Yeah.
I think they're giant. They go up and down the shelves, and they figure out what's there, what isn't there. The automated floor cleaners that a lot of grocery stores are using now. They don't even have to have someone. They get the shelving done. They send everybody home, and the robots come through and clean the floor. I mean, it's absolutely interesting. Whether or not it's going to be long-term value to investors, I don't know, and how well these companies will do in the long run. But it's really interesting, and it really continues, I think, to say, okay, well, there's a way to do things that may be more cost efficient in the long run.
True. Yeah, I want to bring in some more agricultural and food service tech back to the food club next year too. We talked a lot about CPG this year, which obviously everyone's excited about, but it would be fun to bring in some of those.
And it's an interesting field, and there's a lot going on that I talked to in the last 5 minutes. I mean, there's so much going on in ag tech. Some of it's interesting, some of it's what's the value, but a lot of it, I especially get kind of cool about the robotics and the, having grown up around farms and grandparents having farms and dad and mom growing up on farms, I get real interest. I mean, I weeded, I figured out which plants were bad and cut them away, and spread fertilizer, and cleaned the chicken coops for the fertilizer. They were regenerative because they were poor. So I did all that as a kid. So all that kind of stuff really, really interests me from the perspective of, being able to say, hey, you can automate some of these smaller farms.
That Thank you, Tom. I think Emmanuel has his hand up as well. Emmanuel, you still there?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there another question?
Yeah, he has his hand up.
Yes, I just had a quick question. I heard you mentioned earlier about like this allure towards like premium products because of like the high margins. I just wanted to see if you could like speak to at all like any like new like innovations that like can like allow like companies to like push the premium like branding further, or just like branding methods that people can use to just appear more premium than like their costs really are.
It's a good point, Emmanuel. Branding is a big part of it, okay? But you also have to be branding something that's real. Quality of ingredients is going to be the winner, okay? Using quality ingredients, having quality sources, having those sources transparent and verified, that this is where you're coming from. Using functional ingredients, okay, that deliver something, and a processing method. Everybody talks about ultra processing. We've stopped eating ultra processed foods a long time ago. Even if we're buying a snack or a cracker, we kind of like to check out how it's being made, okay, and know that it's something that's more original, that feels better in the way it was produced. These are the things that that I believe consumers relate to as premium. Okay, it's not just pricing and branding; it's part of it, but they want to know there's quality ingredients and there's real functionality behind it. Okay, that's why you see 23 grams of protein. That's why you see contains this list of vitamins. Okay, this is why energy drinks and I think there's a shakeout coming in a lot of those, because a lot of those energy drinks, they claim to be energy drinks, they're just sugar and caffeine. Okay, and the products that are starting to get into using yerba mate and matcha and trying to develop quality and taste in a different way, I think are the ones that in the long run, I think the more natural energy is going to take the place. I can always have my caffeine in the morning, and I do, but ways to have that energy delivered later in the day and not cause the same effect that caffeine may cause, I think are things that people are going to be really interested in. So yes, a big part is branding, but it mostly comes down to quality of ingredients and the ability to really deliver the functional benefits that people want from that product.
Thank you.
Thanks, Manny, for that question. This has been great, Tom. Really, we so appreciate the amount of time that you've given to us, and I'm just curious how, if students have any other follow-up questions, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Tom@brandjectory.com. Okay, it's really easy. Okay, just reach out to me at tom@brandjectory.com. Our website is brandjectorynow.com, but just reach out to me at tom@brandjectory.com.
Okay.
And I'm always happy to answer questions. If you are developing a product and want to talk more about, Brandjectory, I can tell you about that. But I'm just always happy to answer questions. So if you have an idea you want to pass along, or or something that you're interested or curious about, I'm always happy to talk about that. And if there is something that's going on that you need to talk to somebody who's in a specific field and I have a contact there, I'm always willing to make that contact.
Great. Oh, that's great. Nice
Well,
of you.
I enjoyed this.
Yeah,
I hope
so did
you'll
we.
invite me back. I would
Absolutely.
love to work
definitely
closely
will.
with Babson. And
Appreciate
there's a
the
way to-
info, Tom. Yeah, I'll be reaching out to you, Tom, definitely from
Okay.
the pet food business side. So thank you so much for the info. Very helpful.
Happy
Thank
to talk.
you.
Just reach out.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. If I
Thanks,
can do anything
everyone.
for anybody, just ask.
Yeah, thanks again, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Follow.